Great, thank you. I'm very excited to be here and talk about electric vehicles for an hour. That's one of my favorite topics for sure. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is great, and even better, a lot of new faces. This might be a new area that you're interested in learning more about. So by raise of hands, how many people here drive an electric vehicle, have an electric vehicle? Whoa, it's like 10 or so? That's a pretty good percentage of the audience. Great, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Let's make sure this is on. So I'm going to be talking about electric vehicles in Indiana, in Michiana, and the title here, The Future is Here, I think is really important because most people think this is a futuristic thing, and I hope you leave here today thinking that this is happening here and now in our own community. A little bit about MACOG. We are a regional planning organization, so we are a government entity. And as Maria mentioned, I'm the sustainability person, but we have a lot of other program areas in transportation, community development, and we really work to help local governments coordinate, collaborate on a number of different program areas and solve regional challenges that are better solved if we all work together across political boundaries. So before I jump into the meat of my presentation, I thought I would invite a few guest speakers who do have electric vehicles, just a small portion of those in our region, to talk a little bit about their experience, how they got into it. So first I'm going to start with my friend, Therese Dureau, to talk about her vehicle.
Hello, my name is Therese, and I drive a plug-in hybrid Kia Niro. It's a 2020. I fought hard for this beautiful blue color. And the reason that I wanted a plug-in hybrid and the reason that I had to wait till 2020 after being interested in EVs for a long time was I was really waiting for a form factor that worked for my single girl boss lady lifestyle. So I own a home, I have a dog, I have to carry stuff, and my little Honda Civic was driving me nuts, it's a little tiny trunk. And I was waiting for EVs to get to a point where you could store a lot, they were really flexible. And I also knew that as a one-car household, I wanted the reliability of a gas engine. So really like the plug-in hybrid, the seats fold down and I can fit tons of stuff back in there. I will be in Goshen's First Friday at the electric vehicle, what's it called?
Display, yeah.
Display, so you can check it out there. But one of the things that is my favorite thing about it is that it's a really smart plug-in hybrid. So there's a lot of plug-in hybrids where you get, some miles that are purely electric, but then it reverts to a pretty inefficient gas engine. The reason that I love my Niro is because when I'm driving on gas, I'm still getting 40 to 50 mpgs. It drives, it gets like Prius gas mileage, and I know some people have the Prius plug-in hybrid, which is similar. And then I get 26 all-electric miles. So when I charge up at home, really slowly from my garage or more quickly around town at some of the free EV chargers that the city's provided, I get to drive 26 electric miles, all EV, and my normal driving, that lasts me 3 or 4 days. And then if I'm going on a long trip, I can use the gas engine. I'm still getting great MPGs. I'm regenerating the battery as I'm driving, as I'm braking. So I really love it. I love it for the flexibility. I love it for the dual fuel. Although I will say that having owned it now 2 years, 26 electric miles already doesn't feel like enough. I wish I had more. I wish that I had maybe saved up a little bit more money and sprung for the electric. But I do really recommend the Niro, and I love my combined MPGs. I also love the lower maintenance intervals. I only have to take it in once every 7,500 miles because the oil just isn't getting circulated as much. And I mean, EV drivers will tell you that they have barely no maintenance, so I still have some maintenance. But yeah, really recommend it. If you have any questions, hope to stick around, but if I have to leave before question time, come see me on Friday. Thank you.
Great. There we go.
I'm going to sit down front here. I'm usually tall enough. Most people can see me. I'm louder enough, but most of you can hear me. My name's Don Ermiger, and I drive a 2022 Chevy Bolt EV. I've had it for about a month, maybe 2. Okay, so it's not a long investment with electric vehicles. However, I have owned and operated a Toyota Prius. Bought my first one in 2005, bought my second one in 2018. They are both still running. So I am in the enviable position of having my choice. I could run all electric or I could run kind of electric with the Prius. How did this thing get started? First of all, it all got started for the fact I wanted a garage in my home. Now, this may sound a little silly, but if you take a look at the neighborhood around you, and I do live in the neighborhood around here, I'm about 5 blocks from here, there aren't a lot of houses that have garages. Because at the time they were built, there weren't any automobiles. There were carriage houses, there were stables, but there weren't automobiles to build garages for. So houses went up, they had little yards, but they did not typically have a garage. Now, being a child of the Midwest, and I've lived here since 1987, so I'm not a recent. When I came here, I've always wanted to say, gee, wouldn't it be great to have a garage? Because I was parking on the street. I can't recommend it. But over a period of time, I won't go into the details, so I ended up getting a 2-car garage in my backyard. I said, great, I got some place to keep my cars. I have 2. The next question was, well, okay, what do you want to do next? Well, I always, in the back of my brain, always entertained the idea of having an electric vehicle. Now, I'm not talking about a golf cart, even though I regularly call mine a golf cart. But I wanted something like you're seeing now on the market. And as so many things in my life happened, I stumbled, I had some extra time. I went up to Gates Chevrolet out on Mishawaka Avenue. Okay, thank you, McKinley. And I just stuck my head in. I said, hey, tell me about your electric vehicle offerings. And I sat down with a nice young man and we chatted for a while. He calls me back a week later saying, I have one. If you want it, it's yours. And I said, I'll be there this afternoon. So I ran down, not knowing what I was doing, never test driving one. Ended up buying a brand new 2022 Chevy Bolt EUV. Many people shaking their heads at that point, but that's the sort of thing that I did. One thing I wanted to mention was that I am of an age that I remember when personal computers were first coming along. There weren't personal computers prior to 1981, if you don't count the Apple offerings. So I've ridden the leading edge on that technology. I've been through this before. Okay, it didn't scare me then, it doesn't scare me now. Somebody's got to be first or second. But I'm perfectly happy and taking my experiences, both good and bad, and sharing them with anyone that wants to hear about them. But I don't proselytize, I don't preach one way or another. I'd be happy to share my experience with my vehicle, and that's all I can really talk to. Leah?
Great. So we have one more. Yes, in the back. Sheila.
Hello, Sheila McCarthy. I am here to proselytize. I consider myself an evangelist.
Amen, sister.
Talk you into an electric car, but I suspect you don't need to be talked into it because you're here tonight. So you're here because envision yourself like more than a quarter of the country as your next vehicle being an electric vehicle. And I commend you for that, because there's nothing closer to a cruise ship on land as an electric vehicle. It creates this beautiful sense of space in your life. Creates this beautiful way of relating to time in a way that you wouldn't take for yourself. You know, you might love backcountry roads, but how often would you go on them? No, you're going to get on the toll road, you're going to plow through, you're going to stop at fast food places, you're going to eat in the car, you're going to quick gas up, run to the bathroom, get up. In an electric car, it completely changes all of that, and you're living better. You stop to charge your car, you go enjoy a nice meal at a restaurant. You stop to charge because there's a park there that you can explore, and there's a charger there. So it's a completely different, adventurous, if you will, way of life that you're embarking on, which is pretty exciting and pretty different. In the early 80s, not early 80s, late 80s is when I first heard about electric cars and thought, I'm going to have an electric car by the time, I can buy a car, it's going to be an electric car. And that wasn't the case. I'm sure many of you have seen Who Killed the Electric Car and know the history of that. And perhaps you know that the very first electric car ever made was right here in South Bend, Indiana in 1886. And in fact, there were more electric cars until 1914 than there were gas-powered cars. And then they were just all replaced. And now, in the history of the car, I grew up loving cars. I had a subscription to Motor Trend and Car and Driver. Nothing about electric cars in there, hardly at all about the history of cars. But I'm so glad this museum is now bringing that back to us. So I finally got to a point and said, waited, and it was actually Leah who was doing a presentation on solar panels, and I found out because of my home in a historic neighborhood, it wouldn't be able to have solar, which was very heartbreaking. And she said, well, get an electric car. And I said, what? Those are very expensive, Teslas. And she said, no, I think you can. She told me about her Leaf, and that's how I learned about Nissan Leafs, and I found they actually are very affordable, and ended up with a Leaf, and that started a journey into getting also a Chevy Bolt, and then getting some Nissan Leafs for friends. So happy to find you the electric car of your dreams. And then recently got a Kia Soul EV, which was only made in 5 states. So happy to share that with you. They're beautiful cars. It's the way forward. It's a silent ride. It feels very smart to be passing by gas stations and just never having to deal with any of that again, and instead having like a gas tank in your own backyard that you fill up just with your own electricity. And since being able to get solar then later, having the solar powered car of my dreams from when I was a kid in the 80s. So thank you, Leah, for organizing us this evening.
Great. I hope you enjoyed getting a little different flavor of different journeys. So a bit about my journey. I also started out with a Nissan Leaf. It was my only car, and it only went 100 miles. So I did not go very many places back in 2017. I would rent a car to leave town. But then I transitioned to a Chevy Bolt EV, which went 260 miles. That's like more than double. And I was able to go all over the place, 700 miles one way type distances. And then due to a battery recall, they had no battery for me. GM for free swapped me into a brand new vehicle. So now I have an EUV just like Don over there. But what's so interesting to me about my journey is that what I purchased back in 2017 sold for more than, despite inflation and everything, than what it would cost to buy this car in the 2023 model. About a little less than $26,000, and that's without the federal tax credits that were just renewed, and there'll be some portion of that available starting next January. So the prices have come down. That's very interesting to me. But it is contagious, as Sheila mentioned. But actually, I want to give a shout out to my 89-year-old grandparents who back 10 years ago, they had the very first Nissan Leafs when they only got 70 miles on a charge. They've had one ever since. This is their car. And then I got my Leaf because of them, and then my dad got his Bolt, and then I saw his Bolt, and I wanted a Bolt. And then my sister, at age 25, got her first car that was a plug-in hybrid, and then my other sister was like, she was 30 and she'd never had a car, so then she got an all-electric car from my parents, and then when they did that, they got a Kia EV6 to replace it. So now we're a whole family, but when my sisters, what was interesting to me is when they were thinking about, they're a little late, 25 and 30, but they were thinking, what car am I going to get? And both of them said I couldn't consider, knowing what I know now, having that experience, getting just an all-gas car. And I think that a lot of children growing up in our community today, even though we're in the middle of the Midwest, I think that will be a logical thought of why would I consider these other options, or it might be a logical choice between the two, whereas today we might think of it as an unusual choice. So that's just a bit about me, and the goal for this evening is not to convince you why you should drive an electric vehicle. It is more to help you understand how EV infrastructure is changing and the pace of that change, as well as the options available. And then if you're so interested, to help equip you to make an informed choice about these options so that you would have a smoother transition with this knowledge to EVs in the future. So I'm not actually going to cover all the whys and the savings and the benefits and all maintenance that they alluded to. I'm going to dig into some other different things. But first, I want to, in case people have to leave, this is really important. This Friday in Goshen, they have a really great First Fridays event, and it's a car show, the Volksfest. They have classic cars, Porsche, and we're right down in the middle with an EV display, so you'll have a chance to talk with, I think, up to 20 drivers of different vehicles about their unique experience, from buying a used car for $5,000 that has a range of 50 miles to the latest and greatest, newest, Rivian pickup truck, for example. So just a whole different range of experiences. And then on October 7th, we'll be here, South Bend, for First Fridays for a very similar event.
Question.
Yes.
Where in Goshen and where in South Bend?
Just downtown, in the heart of downtown. So Goshen, it's on Main Street, right by JoJo's Pretzels and West Washington. And then here, we're going to be by the Gridiron. So you can't miss it if you do show up, but highly recommend. So let's start with where we're at now. 0.1% of vehicles are electric in Indiana. That's not very much, but that's actually not the point. You can see it's increasing. This is kind of the Maycog region, Michiana, increasing 50% year over year, which is impressive, but a big increase on a tiny number isn't meaningful. What is meaningful is projections, for example, from Purdue University. This pessimistic case puts us at 10% electric vehicles by 2030. That's less than 8 years away. That's a 100-fold increase in 8 years. And if you think about the charging infrastructure we need to support that, you think about how many vehicles that actually represents, it is a great number compared to where we are today. So we're talking massive change in a short amount of time. Anyone still have a flip phone? Flip phone people? I had one until I was 27. That was unusual for a millennial. And I actually got an electric vehicle at the same time because I needed a smartphone as I got an electric vehicle to be able to figure out where to charge. But so I get that there are going to be people that hold on to older technologies for a long time. So we're not going to get to a 100% EV scenario, and that's not really the point. But this conversation is about an inflection point or a tipping point where we go from early adopters that are willing to sit and charge for an hour to people who want their vehicle to function pretty much like the vehicles they have today. And I'll be showing you how we're about to get to that point where it starts to make sense from early adopter to mainstream. So this tipping point here, there's a 5% threshold, and they've analyzed Each of these lines represents the percentage annually in different countries of EV sales. We're talking all electric. And what they found, this is the moving average of all these different countries. Once they hit 5%, they went off on this trajectory where they just highlighted Norway here. My sister just went there. She was showing me like literally everything is electric. This is like living in the future, 90% of cars being sold are electric. And a lot of other countries are on a similar trajectory, and we just reached the 5% threshold, which is quite remarkable and kind of puts us on this trajectory for a tipping point. But also as far as what vehicles are available, this is 2010. So my grandparents got their electric vehicle about here. There were no options. You're talking a really small car, really impractical, or like the Tesla Roadster, something really expensive luxury vehicle. Those were kind of the two options. We're here, and this is going to be stretched out a bit because of the pandemic and the supply chain and things kind of gumming up a bit and chip shortages. So things are maybe stretching out a year or two beyond, but I can't tell you, so I've been driving an EV since 2017, and I would go use public charging stations on highways all over the place, and I would almost never see anyone. And then last year, suddenly I started seeing, who has the Mustang Mach-E? Like, oh, there's someone else charging here, and it was always a Mach-E. And then a couple months later, it was the Volkswagen ID4. I'm like, they're all over the place. And then it was like a Polestar, and it just like accelerated to where now I'll see maybe a dozen different vehicle models. I just drove all the way to Colorado and back in my parents' EV6. And I would see like sometimes 4 or 5 different vehicles charging simultaneously, all different models. And besides my Bolt, well, actually, it was in my parents' EV6. So every single model that was there, often none of them existed like 18 months ago. So that's the pace of change we're talking about. And the number of models, finally, SUV or like, anyone have a Chrysler Pacifica minivan? Yeah, so family size options, SUVs are all going to be available. Here's just a few. The Chevy Equinox is going to be one of the most affordable SUVs. It's expected to have a price point around $30,000 before the federal tax credit. And that's just a totally different mentality from the luxury vehicle mindset that we've had, and most people probably have. Anyone know what this is? Quiz time. This is the Nissan Ariya. It was one of the first electric SUVs that were announced. So there's a link here to some other future electric vehicles, but despite supply chain, despite some recalls, like the Toyota BZ4X, the wheels fell off on the first few that they put out the door. It's like, well, that's not an electric vehicle problem. That's just a manufacturing problem. So there's some issues here and there with recalls, but by and large, as those are resolved, you're going to see a trend towards SUVs, trucks, just like people want to drive anyway, but also at more affordable prices. And that's really key, vehicles you want to drive at prices you can afford for it to go mainstream. And this year, these last 12 months, is sort of the year of the electric truck. This was just delivered last Friday to the city of Goshen. It's a fully electric Ford F-150 Lightning, and they are going to have a fleet of 3 of those in addition to their Tesla Model 3. But Rivian came out with a truck last year. Chevy Silverado was announced this year. There are some other electric trucks coming in the future, but I think the pickup truck form is something that starts to make sense to a whole different subset of people, contractors, people that need a practical vehicle where you can power a work site, and it has a whole lot of functionality and capabilities that trucks just don't have now without a generator or external power source. So I think coming out with a pickup truck is sort of a really pivotal step for the industry as a whole. Yeah, but where will they all charge? So this is now a very familiar scene for me. You show up, there's between 4 and 12, 20 charging bays, and it's like, uh-oh, there's one and it's broken. The free one's broken. Or like, this is EV6 ID4, or here's me in Colorado Springs. It's 8 a.m. on a Sunday, and there's nowhere to charge. This is at that 0.1% kind of like very low adoption rate. So clearly the problem is charging infrastructure. So we'll do just a brief charging 101. We'll just call them charging stations. You'll see EVSE, which stands for supply equipment, because technically the charger's on board and people can get technical about that. But we'll just use the everyday term, charging stations. ICE stands for internal combustion engine. So if you ICE out a station, that means you're an ICE vehicle blocking a station, not plugged in. That's some terminology. But what's important here is the level of charging to understand the different use cases, because they're not interchangeable. You don't have to have a garage. I've not had a garage in my home, and I actually still charge at a level 1, 110 volt outlet. This is not my car or my house, but just on the side of my house, I have a parking pad. I pull up, I plug in, takes about 2 days. So, not ideal. Most people would install level 2, which is like a dryer outlet, 240 volts. But these are the ones you'll find, like here's Innovation Park, Notre Dame. So you'll find these at destinations, somewhere where you want to stay for an hour, 2, 4 hours, and charge up while you're there. It's very convenient. Or at home, if you want to charge up fully overnight, you would install that at home. That's very different from a level 3 station, like the examples I previously showed. Very short dwell times. Unfortunately, there are different plug types. Unlike level 1 and 2, they all use one plug type. It starts to proliferate here. Tesla does their own thing. We'll talk about that later. But there's this little lonely CHAdeMO plug, which is sort of going the way of older technologies. And this combined plug type is the one called CCS that I'll mention later. But I just want you to know, if you're looking at a Nissan Leaf, a brand new, nice 2023, please be aware that you will not probably be able to use it as a long-distance vehicle, because the federal government, automakers, even Nissan, that Aria on the other picture, they're switching to the CCS plug type. So it's perfectly fine for around town, but that infrastructure is not being invested on a massive federal scale, whereas the CCS plug types are being invested in. So that's pretty important for making that decision, because right now the Nissan Leaf is like $19,000 after federal tax credit, brand new. So it might be the most affordable, but it's a pretty serious issue for using it for long range, unless you're very, very patient. So just a bit about that. I'll leave this here as a reference later as far as speeds and amps and kilowatts if you like electrical information. One more piece of information about charging is that it's either smart or not smart. So if you have a laptop charger, that thing is not smart. You just plug it in, it powers up your laptop. But a smart charger is something that can give you information on number of drivers, how long they were charging, if the station you want to use is currently occupied. You can get in a queue and kind of schedule your own charging. That's important because smart chargers, they go in your phone. This is not ideal. This is my phone's folder for all the different types of networks I may encounter at any given state or location. It is a lot. In the past, you had to have a physical card for every single network. When smartphones weren't quite, like 2017, you would have a physical card. Now it's transitioned all to app-based. But we're moving towards greater interoperability, where if you have a membership with one network, you swipe your card, it will work on these other networks. So this is kind of thankfully going away. But what we're moving towards at the auto manufacturer level is a plug-and-charge model, which Tesla has, where you just plug in and your car charges. There's no authentication, fumbling with an app, trying your credit card, the credit card reader's broken. We're moving towards a much more seamless experience here than currently what we're facing. So what does charging look like? Here's South Bend. This is level 2 chargers. Some of these are private, not all of these are public. This is the whole state of Indiana, level 2 charging. Level 3 charging, remember that's the fast charging, where you're getting many miles every minute instead of many miles every hour. It's really the difference. Fast charging availability, Evansville, nothing. Fort Wayne, nothing. 65, nothing. There are some really big significant gaps if you need to get, like from here to here and back, or need to go to Fort Wayne. These are pretty problematic, and fortunately these are being resolved. Locally, we have an Electrify America station with, I think, 4 stations at UP Mall. We have Tom Naquin installed a 50 kW, which is kind of a slower, technically fast charger. I don't use these because you need them when you're passing through on a long distance trip generally, unless you can't charge at home. Then they become very important for people who, like my sister, has a Chevy Bolt but she rents an apartment, so she relies on public charging, and sometimes it's more convenient to charge quickly. But I don't want to leave out Tesla. Give a shout out to their Tesla Supercharger network. Tesla people, yeah, you have it made. I can't deny today that it is a much more seamless experience to travel coast to coast without any problems. And here's the toll road, Indiana Toll Road. They have chargers spaced so that you can get across the state of Indiana. For me, my car, I can charge like over here in Ohio, and then I'm home, and there's nothing in between unless I chose to stop at UP Mall, which I shared on the last slide. So there are still some pretty significant gaps, but Tesla has most of those resolved. And along came the Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal. Anyone remember that? That ended up being a really great thing for electric vehicles. $2 billion over 10 years. We're about 5 years into it. And they've already built out this entire network that's starting to mimic, and actually sometimes as I'm charging, I see the Teslas over here and then the Electrify America over here. They're building this out. Right now they're focusing on metro areas and the highway locally between Chicago and Grand Rapids. They're building that out more, but with a focus on more metro areas. I was entirely dependent on this to get to Colorado, this network, this trip here. Without that, it wouldn't have been possible even 2 years ago to make that trip. But it was possible thanks to this investment. What's coming up in the future? So the other piece of the Volkswagen settlement led to Indiana getting about $41 million, 5.5 of which they're putting towards the very first attempt to have a comprehensive transformational network of level 3 charging. These green dots are all the locations. There's about 60 of them that the utilities are going to be building out. And according to NIPSCO, they're doing site prep right now, and they hope to have them first quarter next year operational for their 10 stations in northern Indiana. So this is a pretty big deal. All those gaps will be resolved within the next 12 months. All these 60 have to be in by the end of 2023. So it's going to be a night and day difference between right now and 12 months, 18 months from now. Who's heard of the federal investment in charging? Some pretty big announcements over the last year. It's called the NEVI program, stands for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, and INDOT just had some public engagement sessions, and they came up with a plan, and they're going to be spending $100 million. I just mentioned 5.5 through Volkswagen. Now they're going to be spending $100 million just in Indiana over 5 years to build out even more stations, because just because you have a station, now we have a queue of 10 cars, you can't really wait 15, 20 minutes each, and that's just not gonna work. So we need lots of stations at each of these locations, not just a station or two. They hope to be installing those in 2024. They have to be installed along the interstates in US 31, and MACOG's petitioned successfully to have INDOT hopefully apply for US 30 to be included so that people can get to Fort Wayne or to Chicago without necessarily having to take the toll road if they don't choose. So that's something I'm excited about. What about our friends in Michigan? If you spend as much time in Michigan as I do, they are focusing on the Lakeshore Circuit. They're building out charging. Actually, Rivian is doing that at no cost to the taxpayers, a private investment. And they also have incentives where they're building out EV charging in addition to the Volkswagen money that Michigan also got. They're a little bit farther ahead than Indiana as far as being able to charge when you're visiting them. So I wanted to give a shout out to that because I do a lot of camping and hiking and traveling up to the northern lower Michigan, and it's pretty critical to be able to charge. All right, so what about private sector rollout? I've just listed a number of announcements just since this February of Chase Bank, Kroger, pilot travel plazas, Walgreens. This is the pilot station. So it's not federally driven or state driven alone. There are private sector investments that are very large that are happening across the country. Some of those have automakers driving them, others don't. Others just see the business case of getting people to come to your location. A lot of the Electrify America are at Target and Walmart. And so now I spend a lot more time shopping in Walmart than I did before because that's where I get all my snacks. Level 2, we've been talking about Level 3, which is really critical and transformational for long distance travel and being able to use your vehicle like you would any other vehicle. But I want to tell you about Level 2 infrastructure in our region. MACOG helped write a grant for these 10 stations. I was just visiting City of Warsaw's that just got installed, 2 of them right downtown. But here locally, there'll be one at IUSB, one at the zoo in South Bend. There's one Mishawaka by the mill that's already installed there. And here's just a snapshot of, let's see, Goshen Library, Mishawaka, Town of Culver, and these are Warsaw that are complete, and 5 more by the end of the year. A little snapshot about how they've been used. So this is last December. This green bar represents the charging station over by Howard Park. Has anyone seen that? Used that? Yeah, so that one's currently free. It is networked, so I can get data from it, but because it's free, I don't know how many unique drivers I have. But that's not Volkswagen funded, but I wanted to give a comparison of, this is the number of sessions per month. And we have Mishawaka in dark blue, Goshen in light blue, Culver appears in gray when they installed theirs, but if you look at Culver, like, it takes some time for people to find the station and start to use it. And similarly, we expect that trend in other places, but we're seeing, what is that, 160 sessions per month at South Bend Howard Park, and I think the others will catch up because that one's been installed for a couple of years. And then unique drivers, we're getting almost about 20, in many cases, many months, we're getting 20 unique different cars charging each month at each of these charging stations. And like Town of Culver was approaching that as well. And that's just like a pretty small town. So there are a lot of vehicles out there looking for a place to charge, and towns want to draw them to their downtown to go shopping and eat at their restaurants. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears from talking about the infrastructure that we anticipate and talk about, okay, if you want to buy an electric vehicle, now what? There's a pretty big car buying paradigm shift that doesn't just apply to electric vehicles by any means, but kind of the recent old days where you go to the lot on a Saturday and you see what's there, you test drive a couple cars, you go to a different lot, you test drive a couple cars, you haggle, you walk away, you bluff, and then you get a good deal, and you drive away that day, sign all the paperwork. Now you're paying markups, possibly up to $10,000 on some electric vehicles, even locally. But for the most part, if you're not wanting to pay markups, if you want something that's, you won't be getting something that's in inventory, you will have to order, reserve something that doesn't even exist yet, and then wait. If you ordered a Cybertruck, you've been waiting a very long time. My dad has had an order in for a Ford F-150 Lightning for like 18 months and no invite to even order yet. So it's hard to know, but many people have had success with getting a lower price by being patient. But that means don't expect if your car is totaled to go out and be able to buy an electric vehicle this month. You may get lucky, but that's not necessarily the case. So there's been a paradigm shift. So it behooves you, if you're interested in an electric vehicle, to plan ahead, do some research, find out what are the announcements of the cars coming out, what's currently available, what can I reserve, which would be non-refundable, or order, which would not be refundable on your deposit, and think about how the charging infrastructure is going to be transformed over the next year and a half. That kind of matches up pretty well with the timeline of the vehicle models that are supposed to be coming out and the improved charging availability. So this is a forecast of electric vehicle sales. And let's see, here we are, 2021 was just under 3%, and then we just in 2022 hit 5%. 2030, they're projecting 30% of new cars will be electric that are being sold. And already today, I think 30% of millennials want their next car to be electric, and 25%, or about a quarter of all future car buyers are interested in electric vehicles. So it's going to be crowded, and it behooves you to plan ahead because once it finally makes sense for a certain majority of people to look into this, now you have a crush of demand. So you want to plan ahead. I want to talk a little bit about the incentives that are available so you're aware of the federal tax credit. I'll talk more on the next slide, but that was just revised in 2022. It had been $7,500. Tesla had hit the cap on vehicle sales. GM had, Toyota was hitting it, Nissan was next. That was renewed, but it's scrambling things a bit. We'll talk about that later. Indiana has no state tax credit like Illinois' $4,000 tax credit. Many other states have one. I don't anticipate that. I wouldn't plan around that. But charging infrastructure, I just verified that the individual tax credit on installing your own level 2 at home, that was just renewed retroactive to the beginning of this year. So if you just installed that in 2022, you get that up to 30%, up to $1,000, whichever is less. And then utility incentives, NIPSCO doesn't currently have anything, although they were ahead of the game 5 years ago with their incentives. But currently, Indiana Michigan Power here and in Elkhart, that utility is giving $500 for your EVSE, as well as a discounted off-peak rate if you don't have solar and wind. And they want you to shift your charging to the night where it's cheaper. The electricity for them is cheaper. It actually balances out the grid over a 24-hour period. It is the worst thing to come home and plug in right at 5, 6 p.m. when they're hitting their peak, or during the day when air conditioning is running. They really want you to, it benefits all customers to be charging off peak. So I think it's like 7 cents or something around 7, whereas you're paying like 10.5 or somewhere around there. So it's a considerable savings to be aware of. A little bit about the federal tax credit. I would say it's complicated and it's not clear yet how this is going to play out because they've added in a component of where the vehicles are manufactured and like domestic assembly. So that's going to be complicated. I don't have any concluding statements of like this model is going to be eligible or not. It's going to be based on the VIN number. It's no longer going to be like if you buy this vehicle, you're guaranteed to get the tax credit. You really need to look into the VIN number. Which complicates the car buying process, but you should just be aware of it. But they did some things to make it more equitable, which is that they capped the income. Before you could be Elon Musk and buy an electric vehicle and get the tax credit. Now they've capped the income. And they've also capped the cost of the vehicle. I think trucks and maybe SUVs, they can't be more than $80,000, and other cars can't be more than $55,000. So automatically that kind of knocks off Rivian and Lucid and some of those other more expensive vehicles, but it brings the benefit more to the middle class to be more equitable. And none of these were in place before. And it also added a new used vehicle credit, which is interesting. 30% of the vehicle cost up to $4,000, but it has to be on a vehicle that's $25,000 or less. So it can't be a $50,000 used Model X. So again, trying to shift the benefits more to the middle class there. So just want you to be aware that this is really changing, and it'll be evolving as everyone figures out how the domestic assembly requirements apply. So I'm throwing in some comparison tools for you to look at later if you're interested in diving more into this. If you're interested in the environmental component of how clean is your electric vehicle with grid electricity, there are some tools out there from the Union of Concerned Scientists, namely that it is now cleaner to drive an electric vehicle on grid electricity with all the coal and the natural gas that it does have. It is now cleaner than to drive a Prius, which is the most efficient hybrid vehicle. I think it's around 56 miles per gallon, and here it's the inverse, 65. So that threshold was just crossed in the last year or two as the amount of clean energy increased on the grid. And then this from the same report shows how people are usually asking about battery manufacturing, the carbon debt, how that plays into the overall life cycle. So it's about half the carbon emissions for an electric vehicle compared to gasoline after you look at the battery manufacturing. This talks about our electricity grid. I won't go into that now. Another comparison tool is from Argonne. If you want to compare specific models on like fuel costs, Toyota Prius Prime, Bolt UV, and like a Chevy Malibu. You can look at your fuel savings and put in the price per gallon and your electricity cost at home, and you can really run the numbers yourself and pick the vehicles you want to analyze. And part of that benefit, that difference in fuel costs, is driven by electricity being stable and low and fuel being volatile and recently high, and anticipated at least not to return to some of the levels we saw in the pandemic. If you care about your vehicle efficiency, wait, let's see. This is the Indiana Department of Energy Alternative Fuel Data Center. If you want case studies on life cycle emissions of battery manufacturing or really academic things, this is where you want to go and look up those case studies and reports, and I'll leave that reference for you later. If you're more interested in just comparing different models, what's out there, filtering them, the PlugStar tool is really useful because you can filter what are vehicles under $40,000 that are all electric or not, like this is a plug-in hybrid, and you can say number of seats and SUV or truck, and you get a list of what is technically out there. It doesn't mean you'll find it in South Bend today, but technically available. However, my favorite tool is just a simple printable spreadsheet table. And I did bring a number of copies, so if anyone wants that, it compares things across so many different items: safety, charging speed, upfront cost. The federal tax credit thing will get complicated. But it's just really much easier, I think, to look at a glance and compare some of the options out there. One of the main things I've started to look at is fast charging speed and the KW rating. I mentioned 50 earlier. 50 is slow. That federal network that's being built out, $100 million in Indiana over the next 10 years, that money is going towards something 150 kW or faster. So you want to think about the vehicle I'm buying now. If I want to be able to use it and charge on that network, 150 would be a good charging speed to shoot for. Faster than that, okay, but I found with my parents' vehicle that can charge, I think up to 220 is as fast as we've seen it charge. It does that for a couple minutes, the cable gets really hot, and then it slows way down. And those stations that are they go up to 350 kW, those are the ones that are always broken. So it's a technology that's very, very fast, but it's problematic because the amount of power that you're pushing in there can cause things to overheat. And we found it was more reliable and actually faster to charge at the 150 kW speed at the infrastructure we have today. So I'm just sharing that as an anecdote. You don't need to get the most, the fastest possible charging speed out there as well. So, and our charging times were about 20 minutes compared to if I had my Chevy Bolt, it would take an hour. That's a big difference. By the time we went in, got some snacks, my dog went to pee. She did drive all 2,500 miles with us, but usually we were waiting on her and my mom, not the car. So that was annoying. It's like, mom's like, oh, I thought we could shop for a while. And no, the car's done, we're going. So I just talked a little bit about fast charging, that 350, but I want you to also be aware if you're doing math and you're calculating how many miles you should be getting per minute, it is not actually a linear process. I mentioned you'll hit, like this is my car. My car technically charges at 50. But it starts at 50, it goes down, and then once it gets to 80%, it will even drop off much further. So what you want to pay attention to is what it says, up to 80% in how many minutes. That sort of captures that charging curve phenomenon. Rather than doing a straight linear calculation, you'll be like, wow, I get 500 miles in 30 minutes, but it would not have that behavior. Okay. So I have just a few slides to compare efficiency of different vehicles. I'll leave that for you if you want to see that. Efficiency matters because you can't compare a Rivian pickup truck. Am I offending anyone? Anyone in here? No? You can't switch from a gas car to a Rivian pickup truck and necessarily save fuel if you're switching from a very efficient Prius to a relatively heavy or inefficient, it's a pickup truck. So if you care about fuel costs, if that's what is motivating your switch, first you want to think, what's my miles per kilowatt hour? These represent different miles per kilowatt hour. And that really determines your cost per mile, as well as what does it cost to charge? So if you go charge at level 3 stations that are paid, and you pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour, which is 4 times what it would cost to charge at home, you're not going to save money, and people get upset. They're like, I thought that the car salesperson told me I would save money with this car, and now it's costing me so much more. These are utility rates. You see the cost per mile is like 4 cents or 3 cents per mile. If you're up here and you're driving a moderately efficient vehicle, now you're approaching 10 to 12 cents per mile. And you can look at what that compares to with gas vehicles as well. But That's just an important component. So anyway, that was a lot of information. We have just a few minutes for questions.